President Trump is looking ahead to tax reform as the next item on the agenda following the failed attempt to repeal and replace Obamacare. But the same divisions within the Republican Party that stalled the health care bill still exist.
Over the weekend, the president blamed conservative members of his own party for his first major legislative defeat and indicated that he's willing to work with Democrats to try and fulfill his agenda. For more now, we turn to USA Today Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page. Thanks for joining us, Susan.
Great to be with you.
All right, so tax reform.
Easy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Historically, not a
So
problem.
easy. Everybody's always on the same page.
The president needs a win. We heard over the weekend the possibility he's willing to work with more moderate Democrats. But what really needs to happen in order to push tax reform in a positive direction?
You know, tax reform is as complicated as health care, maybe more so, and with the same kind of very far-reaching economic consequences. And that's why we haven't had a big tax reform bill since 1986. And, you know, I covered that tax reform debate, and they just barely got it over the finish line. They had a powerful president, President Reagan. They had Jim Baker as Treasury Secretary, very skilled strategic guy. And they got it done, but just barely, and no big tax reform bill since then, because it involves conflicting interest groups within the Republican Party. And that means that when President Trump tries to do this, he's going to face the same sort of civil war and divisions that he had on health care.
It's interesting. I read in the papers this weekend that one of the difficulties right now with the Republican Party is that they've spent the last 7, 8 years talking about Obamacare and talking about repealing it. They actually haven't worked to legislate anything. They're not savvy and strategic as Jim Baker was in getting things done. Now, the president has signaled he wants to work with Democrats. Senator Chuck Schumer of New York has said he's kind of open to that. Is there any incentive for them if the Republicans are imploding?
I think it is going to be hard for Democrats to throw a lifeline to President Trump. And, you know, at the very beginning of the Trump administration, there was some debate, including with Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, over whether there were things on which they should try to cut deals with this new White House, including on, say, infrastructure, an infrastructure bill. Since that time, there has been an enormous stiffening of the spine of the Democratic base. 3,000 people demonstrated outside Chuck Schumer's house in Queens saying, don't make a deal with this president. So I think it is hard to see how Democrats actually work in a serious way at least until we get through another election in 2018.
You know, you talked about the Republicans spending all this time basically saying no, but now actually having. And one of the things they said no to was Obamacare. 7 years of it's a mess, it's a mess, it's a mess. The whole campaign, repeal and replace. 2 months. For 2 months they tried, you know, an alternative, and then they were like, you know, now he's ready to move on. I'm wondering about his supporters. I mean, how disappointed must some supporters be that they pushed for a replacement for only 2 months?
Yeah. You know, I think for some core Republicans, this has got to be kind of a shock. And I think there is an assumption on the part of some Republicans they're going to come back to trying to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act because it was something they talked about. It was a great issue for them for 4 election cycles. So how do you spend 64 days or just 18 legislative days on it and then say, oh, too hard, we're done?
Yeah.
The other thing that's going to happen is there are going to be some big issues that come up with health care in the next year or so that the government will have to deal with, maybe not as Republicans and Democrats, but things like these exchanges. They're still the law of the land. This is still how a lot of Americans are buying health insurance. Will there be efforts to prop up the exchanges so they work better? There's a court battle over the subsidies for lower-income Americans. Will the Trump administration continue to fight for those subsidies as the Obama administration did? We don't know the answer to those questions yet.
Right.
I want to ask you about the reports that the president's son-in-law, which CBS News has confirmed, has been given a new position in the White House. He's going to be running some sort of SWAT team, and I don't mean that in a military sense, but a strategic sense, in going after some of the big issues, the big priorities the president has laid forth. What's your take on that? And is that an effective strategy? Although he wasn't around for this health care debate, which apparently the reporting
he went
is.
Skiing.
He went skiing. Yeah. What else are you going to do?
Okay, wouldn't we all?
Right. Yeah.
You know, I think it shows how powerful and influential Jared Kushner continues to be in this administration. This office sets up a kind of independent power center that does not go through the Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus, or through Steve Bannon, the Chief Strategist. On the other hand, it reminds me a little of Al Gore's vice presidential initiative on reinventing government, which can do good things, but it doesn't go to the core issues and the core promises that were made in the campaign.
Be interesting to see how it plays out. Susan Page of USA Today, as always, thank you.
Great to be with you again.